Today I'm going to be making a leather sheath for this buoy that I made in the last video I posted. If you haven't seen that video, I'll leave a link to it at the end of this one. All right, so what I've got here is a pattern that I've already drawn and cut out. Let me show you what it looks like. I basically draw out the pattern, trace out the knife, and I leave about 5/8 for the welt all the way around. The knife will come and sit in here. Actually, the loop will be in there, and another piece to make this a close to a triple welt right here. It will be triple here, and then it'll taper down. Nothing special about this sheath, and for what it's worth, I'm not a leather craftsman. I make all the sheaths for the work I do, the knives I build, but leather craftsmen will laugh at the way I do this. So I'm just showing you how I do it. I'm not telling you how to do it. I don't have a sewing machine. I do everything by hand. So first thing I'm going to do is cut out this pattern out of some 8 to 9 ounce vegetable tan leather and cut the welt and start assembling. So let's get to it. I got some water on this leather. I just tried to dry it up a little bit. It'll be okay. This is some 9 ounce vegetable tan leather, and I'm going to cut out the patterns. I use a razor knife, but I really need to make myself a good leather knife. Just hadn't never got around to doing it. Been doing this for 35 plus years and always use a razor knife. Get both sides cut out, and I'll start on the welt. All right, I got the sheath cut out, but this is for a left-hand sheath. So, you big dummy, had to cut out another one. I'll use this one on another knife. All right, first thing I'm gonna do, get these edges cleaned up. And I'm going to tool this face and get the welt ready. I've got some stacks here I'll put in here to increase the welt thickness at the top where the blade goes in. I'll be using some weldwood contact cement. I know that's probably not the correct thing to use, but it works great for me. So let's get these cleaned up. Just getting everything straight. Make sure I don't have any wavy lines when I start laying out the tooling. I like to have everything straight, and this is what I do to begin with. I'll come back and clean it up once I'm done. Here I'm just tapering the belt loop. I want it to fit down and under the welt. It'll go inside the sheath and just blend in with the bottom of the sheath. Go ahead and edge bevel that belt loop because I won't be able to get to it after I get everything glued up. I'll go ahead and burnish the places I won't be able to get to, and I'm just using a piece of deer horn to do that. Got another way I do burnishing, and I'll show that to you in a few minutes. Just roughing up these welt pieces so the glue will stick a little better. I like to go ahead and get everything glued up and ready for when I start assembling. And while it's drying, I can move on to another step. Just cleaning up the inside of that loop where I did the burnishing. Kind of folds the leather over. I like to cut that off, keep it smooth. Go ahead and burnish the snap loop. I just wet it with a little water and then burnish it with the antler. I'm going to go ahead and place it in position and get ready to sew it on, because I have to sew it on now because I'm going to be folding the loop in, won't be able to get to it. I'm going to clean up this welt, and then I'm going to taper them a little bit so that they'll taper down into the sheath. And this is how I like to burnish everything. I use basically a wooden dowel with some grooves in it to get into corners. I wet the leather and burnish it with the lathe. I'm going to do some stitch grooving and mark it to start sewing it. Here's where the leather crafters will gig me. I use a drill press to punch my holes. I use a 5/64 bit for the sinew I'm using. Cleaning out the back side where the threads are sinking to the leather using a groover. As I mentioned, I'll be using sinew here, doing a saddle stitch. A lot of people shove both needles in at the same time from the opposite ends, but I'll do one needle at a time. I find it easier to do when using sinew to sew with. Yeah, I know, I need to be saying sinew. I just call it sinew. It sounds cooler. I do a couple back stitches, then I cut it, burn it, and push it down flush with a little hand tool. Now I'll go ahead and get the welts glued in. So I'm making another mistake here. Don't say nothing, Fred. And see if you can pick it out, but we'll correct it later. I'm just using a set of dividers to lay out my lines to start doing my hand tooling. I got this one set at 3/8, and it's where I'll start my tooling. Then I just use a little probe to make them a little deeper and wider. So I'm going to be doing a basket weave, and I like to lay out some lines to keep everything straight. I'm not the best hand tooler in the world, not even close, but I just get by. This is how I do it. I like to get everything wet down, and I'll keep it pretty wet as I go, but not soggy. I don't want the leather to be distorting. And we'll start tooling. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the border around it, and I'll be using the line that I use the dividers for to give me a guideline. Now you can see the mistake I made a while ago, but I've already fixed it. I had to slide that belt loop underneath the welt. I had glued my welt on before I done that, so I just took razor, cut them back a little bit, slid it under, re-glued it, and we're ready to go with the top side of the sheath. I like to put the contact cement on, let it set till it's good and tacky, and once you stick it on, it's not moving. I use scrap pieces of leather as backing when I'm using clamps like this. That way you don't put any kind of indentions in your leather. It's very smooth. You can't even tell you ever had them clamped. Now I'll go ahead and do the final profiling before I lay out my stitch groove. Pretty tricky when you're using a drill press like this to do this. Keep everything straight. You don't want to have your holes going off to one side. You want to keep your sheath straight, level, and something flat, and get these holes straight. Now I'm going to groove out the back side of the sheath so that the thread will be down in the leather like it is on the front side. And now we'll go ahead and get it sewed up. I'm going to be using about 15 foot of thread, and I'll have about 3 foot left over. But I'd rather have more than less. I like to run back over the threads front and back with the stitch marker, and it makes everything lay down, push in there real neat. Now just a little final cleanup, and I'm also beveling the edges. Instead of using a regular hand beveler, I just have a 120 grit belt, lightly go over it, makes a real clean bevel. And we'll go ahead and get it burnished. I'm not going to be wet molding this sheath, it's not necessary, but I am going to wet mold the belt loop to kick it over to where the knife can go into the sheath without hitting the loop, and makes it neater. Then we'll go ahead and get the snap laid out and get them installed. I'm cutting out a groove on the back side of that snap where it'll sink down into the leather and not be rubbing on the handle material. I like to wet the sheath down before I put the dye on, just flows better, a little smoother. I know this is going to look crazy, but I'm doing a two-part dye here. I'm putting black around the edges and some on the front and backs of the sheath, and I wanted to kind of have a transitional effect from brown to black, but it's very subtle. You'll see at the end. And I got the black everywhere I want it, and then I've started the brown, and it'll go over everything including the black, and it'll blend in nicely. Now that the dye is dry, I'm going to go ahead and oil it. I like to use neat's foot oil. Then I'll come behind it with a mixture of beeswax and mineral oil rub. Yeah, spill it everywhere. I'll put the oil on heavy, real good soaking, and this sheath will be around a long time. Well, I think it's ready for a knife. Well, I hope you enjoyed this and got something out of it. If you got any questions, leave them down below. I want to thank my patrons, and I want to thank you for watching.